Um, so yeah, our final guest, I guess, for the presentations today is Ben Fulton, and he is a lawyer who we had on Outlook a while back talking about some guide dog discrimination issues he's had with himself, and but today he's actually coming to speak on another subject because yeah, he's got some expertise and can speak to a lot of these things. So we'd like to introduce Ben to speak for our remaining, get to round out the full actual day of speakers, I think. Ben, you can. I think you're there.
Stay tuned for the banquet, everybody. It's
Yeah,
going to be a
exactly.
big one too.
There's so much to celebrate.
Hi, I'm hoping everyone can hear me.
Sounding great, man.
Yes, we can.
Great. Yeah, okay. I'll just toggle my speech off. There we go. My name is Ben Fulton. I'm here in my, home office, just wearing jeans and a t-shirt today, but if you could see, there'd be the, my rack of suits behind me. It's on wheels, so I can wheel it away. And, this pandemic has certainly been a challenge, making multiple appearances in court by Zoom and experimenting with different camera angles, getting, feedback from judges and everything, and, working with different virtual backgrounds. So I've got that all figured out now. And I've been practicing law for a little over a year now. I was initially, called to the bar in 2019. And I basically started a solo practice in 2020. It's been a really interesting first year of practice. In some ways, it was kind of a major leveling where everyone was scrambling. Nobody knew how all these Zoom appearances were going to proceed. And the courts are continuing. And now that they are continuing, although there was just a recent shutdown of the courts, even the remote appearances are now being adjourned until May 10th. So it looks like actually the courts do need to grapple a little bit more with how to manage these remote hearings. I guess the way they established the technology, people were, still having to come into courts, and I guess they still felt that even with lower and reduced numbers, this was still a high risk factor. So they kind of shut that down a little bit, and they're still grappling with making some adjustments to really allow remote proceedings to, continue throughout the duration of the pandemic, sort of regardless of the level of lockdown we're in. So right now, that's kind of still an ongoing issue with access to justice. All that aside, though, I'm optimistic that this summer, with the help of a colleague of mine from Osgood, that we will be launching a challenge to a part of the Ontario Human Rights legislation, the Ontario Human Rights Code, OHRC, which is the governing legislation in this province. Each province has their own legislation, and there's similarities between the provinces. I'll get to that in a little bit here, but basically in a nutshell, it has to do with housing. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about myself as well, and how I came to, take up this particular cause. So basically, I came to Ontario here to study at Osgood Hall, and I'm from BC originally. So I moved here. I have friends who live in Mississauga, but it's a pretty lengthy commute from Mississauga to Osgood. In terms of minutes, it would take at least 90 minutes each way every day of classes. So, of course, I was interested in finding a place very close to the university. There's a large sort of housing area just south of campus, sort of colloquially referred to as the student village. It's a lot of detached houses that are sort of rented out room by room by landlords that have these houses. Like some of them are 10 and 12 bedroom houses that are being rented out, each room separately. And it's mostly populated by students who, like myself, don't need a lot of space, a shared room, or, like a bedroom and a shared accommodations with, shared kitchen and bathroom facilities is fine. You know, we're there to study, we're there to learn. We, you know, have a very specific goal in mind, and, you know, that kind of accommodation is really all that can be afforded. You know, myself, you know, I don't come from a lot of money, so like realistically about, you know, $600 a month is all I could reasonably afford, and that's the going rate of these kinds of accommodations that are very close to the campus. Just for comparison, the available student housing that was available on campus was around $880. And it went up from there. That was like the basic. There were, you know, you could get a little bit more space for like $950 or anyways. So the cheapest on-campus student accommodations was, you know, above what I could reasonably afford. And I was looking for a place. It took me a long time to find a place my very first year. I'd set up everything. I was ready to come and look at a place. I brought a friend with me. We drove out together. The place looked great. It was, you know, about a 20-minute walk from the university. And I was ready to rent it right then and there. And the person who was showing us the place just all of a sudden told me that it was no longer available, that it had been rented. And, you know, I had called, you know, a few hours before, you know, confirming that we were on our way, we were coming to look at this place, it was available. I mean, the only explanation that seemed to make any sense to us is that she saw my white cane and didn't want to rent to me on that basis alone. And as I continued to look for housing, this became more and more apparent. And even some landlords told me, you know, to my face in words that they couldn't rent to a blind person, that there'd be problems. Interestingly enough, the first, you know, place that I found where the landlord was actually willing to rent me a place did so conditionally on me signing a waiver of liability, you know, saying that I wouldn't sue him if I did something like falling down the stairs, you know. And I mean, I signed the waiver so I could rent the place. I kept a copy of it, and it will be part of my submissions to the court to show them how endemic this kind of discrimination is. You know, I moved away for the summer. In first year, I went back home. You know, I spent some time with my family there. I actually did an exchange, a student exchange, summer exchange program to Italy. I spent a month there. It was a wonderful experience. But, you know, I let the place I was renting go, you know, somewhat aware of the problems I'd have renting another place. And again, I experienced problems. I was able to rent a place. I rented it for 2 months because I was 1 month into this semester by the time I was able to rent the place. 2 months into this semester, classes were over. And so I actually just commuted from Mississauga for my 3 or 4 final exams that I had throughout the month of December. And in January, I was doing a placement in downtown Toronto. So the commute from Mississauga there was actually less far than the commute from York, where the university is located. So, you know, all that aside, when it came to third year, I experienced my biggest challenges ever. And in text messages that went back and forth from me to this one particular landlord, they indicated to me that there was a room available, that, you know, I could come and look on it on a particular day. And now at this point, I had actually shown up to places to have people reject me on the doorstep so many times. I was starting to self-disclose that I was blind because I just didn't even want to waste my time going to a place if that was going to be the answer. So in this text message, I communicated that I was blind. And the answer I got back was that they could not afford to rent to me. And I, you know, I offered to sign a waiver because that worked for the one landlord. You know, maybe they're thinking they can't afford it because I might sue them for damages. And I offered to get like tenant insurance because, maybe they're worried that I would, not know how to use a stove properly and cause some damage, so, but it didn't seem to matter. They didn't really respond to my, further text messages. And I basically just decided that I had a strong enough case to show that this was discrimination to file a complaint with the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, the HRTO. In the process of filing this complaint, they responded to me drawing my attention to section 21, sub 1 of the Human Rights Code of Ontario, that says, a person's right to be free from discrimination is not infringed where the landlord shares a kitchen or bathroom. And what that means is if a landlord is advertising a room for rent in a home where they're living in the same home, they're sharing the kitchen and the bathroom, that they're allowed to, they're legally allowed to say that they don't want to rent to you because you are blind, period, end of story. And there's actually nothing legally that you could do about it with our existing legislation. So the only thing left to do is to change the legislation that we live with. And that is the plan for this summer. I've, retained the services of a friend of mine. He graduated 2 years ahead of me in law school. He's on his own. He does civil litigation. I'll be working with an intern student from Osgood. She starts work on Monday. We're going to be putting together this challenge and moving forward with it on this summer. We've approached some interveners like the Canadian Center, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, CCLA. We're still waiting to hear back from them. The Center for Equity Rights in Accommodations, CERA, CERA, and they're big into tenant rights, and they're basically willing to intervene. It's kind of a matter of funding right now, and so we're working on our test case funding application with the Legal Aid Ontario to get CERA on board as an intervener. And so that's kind of where we're at with the case right now. When we launch this campaign this summer, we'll be doing a large social media campaign, Facebook page, maybe Twitter. So we're really going to, make sure we get the word out there in a big way as soon as, the litigation is actually filed with the court. And that's basically, where we're at. And I think if you were reading the description of this, there was something about ways you can help. And so here's ways anybody could help is I have heard that my story is not unique, that I am not alone in facing discrimination when looking for housing. And even though, I've heard sort of colloquially, sort of through the grapevine, people have told me, friends or something that they know, I have yet really to make, solid connections with people who have, their own lived stories to tell of this kind of discrimination in housing, basically, and somebody who would be willing to, write a letter that sort of outlines their story, says, what happened to them. And, that would be part of this court case because, there's a lot to be, said about the law and the way that operates. But judges, courts, they're very receptive to the reality, the social reality of the situation. So, it's one thing for me as one blind person to step forward and say, this happened to me. And for me to say, oh, this is happening to other people. But without the other people there to actually say, yes, this is happening to me too, then, it doesn't carry as much weight. So if I can get, letters from other people who have experienced this kind of discrimination, if friends, anybody, get the word out, that would help make this case a winner. Because when the court's reading everything and they're reading the submissions, and Exhibit F is, letters from 68 people who have experienced this kind of discrimination, that would make the jaws drop. Like, okay, this isn't just one or two or three, the more names we have there, the better. And that's basically my pitch. I'm hoping that, people will know people will be able to, summon the courage to step forward, that, we can, take this cause forward, because again, it's something that we really need to address, because unless we're proactive at stamping out this kind of discrimination, it just, continues to fester and flourish.
Great. All right. I think we should definitely take a couple questions. It's currently almost 4:30 Pacific, and we did have a scheduled open chat from 4 to 5. We're gonna cancel that because this is very important to get this stuff in. And the banquet begins at 5 Pacific, so we will answer as many questions as people have up to a point here, and then we will take a short break before the banquet.
Barry, you are unmuted.
Thank you very much, me again. Ben, first of all, I just wanted to congratulate you on passing the bar. That's a very high achievement, so it is. So well done, sir, on that there. Well, a lot of research and study and had to go into that. I'm curious, the case that you're talking about discrimination. Well, housing, fortunately, isn't something that I've experienced or heard much of over here in Ireland. Our stuff is mainly, the discrimination seems to sort of pop up around guide dog in terms of public and private transport, and in particular jobs. So I was just curious, how do you imagine, or what are you guys going for in terms of changing the legislation to try and make it as airtight as possible? Because I'm not sure about the Canadian legal system or how your human rights laws work over there, but I certainly know from personal experience, time and time again, our own legislation, our own Disability Discrimination Act and Equality Acts over here have often been compared to Swiss cheese because they're so full of holes. And we often have the horrible word reasonable put into our legislation, which often biases the party actually causing the discrimination.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I'll talk a little more about the legislation, and I don't know anything about the UK system.
Absolutely, I wouldn't expect you to know. Yeah. I'm just curious from your system how you would go about this.
Yeah. So in terms of how things work here in Ontario, it will sort of in Canada in general. So each province has their own legislation, right? And so it's interesting to note, actually, New Brunswick. Okay. I'm maybe getting a little ahead of myself. So first I'll talk about Ontario. Okay. Now, what it is that there's this human rights legislation, and it's section 2 of the legislation says that, everybody has the right to be free from discrimination with respect to housing, and not to be discriminated against because of race, religion, ethnicity, disability, sex, sexuality, gender, past criminal record. There's maybe some other things I'm forgetting. It's a lengthy list, but it's or analogous grounds, right? So basically the idea is, you shouldn't be discriminated against. Okay, so that protection is provided for. What happens is section 21 sub
clauses in.
Yeah. So the section 21 sub 1 says, that right is not infringed where the landlord shares a kitchen or bathroom. So it takes that protection away, right? Yeah. So our aim is to remove that part of the legislation so that section 2 would continue to operate.
Makes sense.
Now, in Canada, some of the jurisprudence, I do know that Ireland is a common law system. So you guys do have the same basic, unit of legal system that we have, as opposed to like civil tradition, which is more in Quebec or France. Yeah. Now, the one of the cases here in Ontario is a case from 1980s. It was Blaney v. the province of Ontario. And what was going on there was a young girl, I think she was about 12 or 13. She wanted to play hockey. And she lived in a remote community, and there was only one hockey team, and it was an all-boys hockey team. And, it was the opinion of her coaches and everybody. I mean, she was actually she was the daughter of a very successful hockey player, played professional hockey in Canada. And, I mean, she had the skills to compete. Like, there was no question about that, right? And she wanted to participate, but they wouldn't let her on the team because it was an all-boys team. And they filed a complaint with the Human Rights Tribunal. And I mean, at that time, I think it was, Section 18 that had this, sort of similar provision where, this right to be free from discrimination, was not infringed, where, it was in relation to being on a sports team.
That's fantastic. So you guys can actually reference that as case law.
Yeah, absolutely. Because she was successful in challenging that and having that part of the code changed. Yeah, so that's certainly one of the cases that we're referencing.
Awesome.
Trying to use the same framework. And now, so what I was going to say briefly, I mentioned New Brunswick. They actually don't have a analogous Section 21 that limits the provision. PEI and Saskatchewan, they have a provision that allows discrimination, but only on the basis of sex, not on the basis of any of the other grounds. So, if, somebody was like, say, a female living in a house and she didn't want to rent to someone of the opposite gender, then, there's that protection, which actually exists in Ontario as well, Section 21 sub 2. So Section 21 sub 1 is, just doubly unnecessary. And now, just to quickly talk about what you were saying about this reasonableness thing that creeps in, and it creeps into our legislation too, sometimes in the form of what's called undue hardship, where, an employer must make, reasonable attempts to accommodate, up to the point of undue hardship.
Lovely vague terminology.
Right. And we have, so the Northwest Territories actually operates a similar provision. So their provision, again, is, focused on saying, it's presumptively considered discrimination. But again, if, one example would be, say, somebody who is in a wheelchair and might need a wheelchair lift that might cost, $3,000 to $5,000. And a small time landlord, like a homeowning landlord, might, argue in front of the tribunal that, the cost of them putting in that wheelchair lift would cause them undue hardship. And then our system does have a track record of those kinds of submissions being accepted by the tribunal. So, there is this balancing act, and of course, disability rights don't always win. It is kind of amazing to see some of the decisions that come out. And so, in terms of our goals with the legislation would be to strip that, completely. So we'd be more on a plane with New Brunswick. We're aware that something might kind of creep in. I mean, legislators like to amend legislation, so especially after the court changes it. And, so the possibility of them putting in an analogous provision to the Northwest Territories, that exists. As far as how exactly to tackle that, we're not sure. At least it seems like a step in the right direction. At least then it puts this onus or burden on the landlord to demonstrate that there is some hardship, which I think would be a lot more difficult to show in the case of somebody like myself who is blind but needs no accommodations. I mean, the most I think I've ever asked for is maybe some stickers on the stove so I can feel where the knobs, like, you know, some stoves have like a completely circular knob and hard to tell the indicator, but if you put like a little sticker, then you can feel the raised bump or the indicator on the stove. Is that's, I mean, we're talking, I'll buy the stickers myself, you know, like that's the level of my accommodation. So that would not be considered to raise to the level of undue hardship. Unfortunately, someone in a wheelchair would be, you know, facing their own battle with, you know, more expensive accommodations. But, you know, sometimes incremental improvements are all we get. And again, it would be sort of up to the legislature to respond to the court's declaration upon us being successful.
Thanks very much. Good luck.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Great, really great.
Next is Brian Moore.
Hey, Ben. Hey, Ben.
Right.
So while you're answering Barry's question, I looked up my answer, but it surprises the hell out of me. 21.1, if you're sharing a bathroom and a kitchen, allows discrimination. And I thought, oh, maybe it's only on the protected ground of disability, but no, it seems to be on all protected grounds.
Oh, yes. Yes,
So-
someone could say, yeah. Someone could say, I don't want to rent to you because you're black.
Because you're black, yeah, which,
Yeah, absolutely. Or you're Muslim, or you're Christian.
yeah,
They could, anything, absolutely.
or you're gay, or any other number of, well, any other, or you're in receipt of public assistance, which I see they've added as a protected ground.
Yes, absolutely. No, you're 100% right.
And that shocks me, and I'm quite honestly surprised that there haven't been challenges to that already. I certainly wasn't aware of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, when people realize the breadth of it, it is quite shocking. In fact, a friend of mine who does work with this, you know, tenant housing and stuff, he actually, we were trying to get these, but we weren't able to get them. They were taken off Kijiji before we were able to, but there were actually advertisements on Kijiji, I believe in Hamilton, saying no Indians allowed. And we wanted to really have copies of those to show those to the tribunal. Like, is this the Canada we live in?
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So if I have to share facilities with you, I'm allowed to be as discriminatory as I like. That, can't believe that. Anyway, okay, thanks.
No, thanks for the comments. Yeah.
Next is Mark.
Hi, Ben.
Just a
Really
quick, sorry
appreciate
to interject here. I just quick note, just for time, try and keep the questions and answers a little bit quicker. I hate to say that because it's just
Try
like,
to keep my answers a little quicker, right? I do get
and so I hate to say it, and I don't mind going for another 20 minutes or so. It's just, you know, I'm not sure what everyone else is thinking. So, you know, even if we finish at 5 and then take a 15 and then come back for the banquet would work for me. But so yeah, let's go on.
Okay, no, will do. Appreciate the presentation. Super fascinating issue. So quick comment and then question. Comment is, the analogy seems to me to be Uber, right? So it's your own private vehicle, but if you want to start making money off it, like a cab, then you don't get to discriminate. So I, you know, if you have a reflection on that. But my question, and you've partially answered it, was what other provinces were doing. So you mentioned New Brunswick, PEI, Saskatchewan, Northwest Territories. Would it be fair to say that the other provinces do have a similar kind of exemption on the no discrimination clause? So I live in Alberta. I don't know if you did a full jurisdictional scan, but if you have any other comments on what other provinces are doing, I'd be interested in that as well.
Yeah, actually, we did a full comparative. Dan Cherubellini, the Osgood alumnist I'm working with on this, he made a chart of analogous provisions. So yeah, Alberta, BC, it's phrased differently, but they have basically similar words, similar exemption clauses to Ontario. I'm forgetting exactly Quebec, PEI and Saskatchewan, like I mentioned, they're limited. New Brunswick doesn't. Manitoba, I think, again, was fairly similar to Ontario. Yeah, so across, the different provinces, what's happening in Ontario is pretty much more the rule than the exception, to be fair.
Yeah.
And just to quickly respond to your comment, yes, I really like your analogy. Like, I'd say, like, okay, if you want to live in your house, you can be as racist, bigoted, whatever as you want to be. But as soon as you open yourself to that public market, that sphere of commerce, and you advertise that this is a service that's available for the public to come and make use of, you're offering that service, I think then you do have to abide by, those provisions like Section 2 that guarantees people the right to be free from discrimination.
Totally. Well, good luck. I'll be following it.
Thank you.
Next is Roger.
Oh, hi, Ben. I just had a quick question for you. I brought forward human rights challenges, and I first want to compliment you on stepping forward. And I would encourage that anyone else that ever feels that they've been discriminated against, it is upsetting, it is demeaning, and it really kind of like kicks us in the face, but never try to just shrug it off. Like, always try to, as much as you can, have the courage to step forward to fight it and to challenge people, because we can challenge people, organizations, and businesses, at the tribunals. So that's one thing I just wanted to encourage everybody out there. But from this situation that you're talking about, when I had raised an issue about legislation at the federal level, I ran into the issue where they said that an attack on legislation cannot be addressed by like the federal human rights, that it would have to be an act of parliament. And I'm just kind of wondering in this case too, like where you're challenging legislation at the provincial level, whether you would run into that, or is the provincial level human rights challenge, is that a little bit different?
Oh, you've brought a really great question, and I will try to keep my response as brief in keeping in mind of the time, because I could talk a lot about this specific. But yes, the tribunal itself really lacks the power to grant us the remedy we seek. So that was basically where this thing started, was at the tribunal level. Well, where the charter challenge would actually be brought would be to the court itself. So it would be filing a claim with the Superior Court of Ontario, which has the ability under like Section 52 of the Constitution. So keeping in mind, okay, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is pretty much the first 34 sections of the Constitution. That's the Charter. But Section 52 is as part of the Constitution, not part of the Charter, but it allows any party to bring a challenge to any law that's unconstitutional. Okay, so basically we're using Section 52 to make a claim to the Superior Court of Ontario, seeking a judicial declaration that Section 21 sub 1 of the Ontario Human Rights Code is of no force in effect, that we'd be asking for them to strike it down. Mm-hmm. And the court does have the ability to grant that remedy. And now, like I said, your comment about Parliament, then comes into play, because the legislators do have the ability to then amend the legislation in response to the, court striking it down. So there is a bit of interplay going on there. I mean, one way, lobbying to the Parliament would be another way, just seeking the legislative change at that level. But we've decided to go the court challenge route.
Yeah, well, there's no guarantee if you did seek that through getting legislators to change it, because they would have to, rewrite it, amend it, pass it, yada, yada, yada. The most effective way, I agree with you, is doing the charter challenge. So thanks for the info. Thank you. Good luck.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Eric has his hand raised. I will unmute you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, Ben and I talked about this earlier, and Ben's a member of CFB. We take care of our own, and so there are things that we can do to help. Like for example, we can create a form that people can fill out. We can host it and promote it. We can create a form that people can fill out that will guide you with questions to effectively, tell your story, and then it will go off and create the letter based on the information that you filled out. So if people would find it easier to just craft their narrative and not worry about making a letter and doing this and that, we can do that. It was supposed to be done this week, but work kind of got away from me. So at some point soon we will set this up, and then we'll help Ben promote it.
Join the meeting.
I'm just wondering, how often does it happen that a landlord is sharing a kitchen and bathroom with a tenant? Like, this isn't a case of like a person can't refuse you, right? If they have, suppose that they live in Milton and they have a house in downtown Toronto, and the house is a 5-bedroom house with 2 bathrooms or 3 bathrooms and a kitchen, and they rent each bedroom of this house to a different tenant. That's not under the legislation, right? Because the landlord isn't living in the house. So how often does it happen? I mean, even I have a friend who rents her basement to tenants, to students. She lives in the house, but they don't share a kitchen or a bathroom. The basement is separate and it has its own amenities, and they can talk to each other and they can visit each other and whatever, but they don't have to share amenities. So I'm just wondering, like, do you have some sense of how often people are in this situation?
In terms of hard numbers, not yet. Actually, it's one of the things we're going to be working on this summer. That intern student I mentioned, one of her projects is going to be in compiling some data. So we actually have some hard numbers on sort of the percentage of the housing market that is shared accommodations. So we'll be looking at the total number of ads, on Kijiji, taking samples of those, and then, seeing how much of those are shared accommodations. But in short, it's actually fairly common. It is a situation that arises fairly frequently. And another thing to note is it's not just the landlord themselves, but also family members of the landlord. And, many landlords are aware of this because there's actually sort of similar exemption clauses in the Residential Tenancies Act that, makes it so that if tenants are in a situation with a shared accommodation situation, right? Oh, yeah, they don't have the same protection and rights that. Oh, yeah, could you mute yourself there? Here, Jaws is kicking in. But anyways, they don't have the same rights and privileges because of the shared accommodations. So sometimes landlords will insert a family member into a situation. And I've heard of this happening as well, where, the landlord owns a house, but there's a sister that lives there or a brother that lives there. And so this is one way that they, use to make it so they're not subject to the legislation. And thanks for bringing up the point of the form letter. We will be working on that. Me and Brian have been working on that a little bit. And yeah, we'll get that posted to the CFB site so that, people can just go. There'll be a, link for people to click, and then, there'll be like a form to download, and then you can, easily just insert your own data. So we're hoping that will make the process easier for people.
Next is Justin.
Hey, Ben, thank you for bringing all this info to light. I really appreciate it. Yeah, as someone who's, well, relative, according to everyone here, or a good majority of you who have revealed your ages, either inadvertently or blatantly, I'm going to turn 20 this year. And in the next 12 to 24 months, I plan on spreading my wings, moving out, looking for a place to rent, all that kind of stuff, already looking. Do you have any additional advice for someone like me who is almost fully blind? I do, well, if you want to use the term, self-identify as blind, when looking for any sort of rental properties where what you just talked about may come into effect.
I wish I did. I don't know what to tell you there. I tried almost everything I could think of, and I had difficulties all 3 years. You know, the third year I actually didn't get a place. I actually commuted from Mississauga the entire year, and you know, that was basically part of my you know, complaint is you know, when everything is related to damages, right? You know, how did this affect you personally? How were you injured, right? And the injury was that, you know, 90-minute each way commute, like that, 3 hours a day, every day of classes. I actually kept track of my hours, and I calculated that even at minimum wage, it was in the thousands of dollars all the time that, you know, it cost me to do that. So, I mean,
I don't mean to stump you with a hard question. That's not my intention. I just wanted to know if you had some additional stuff.
You know, just disclose, like you know, like, you know, tell them before you go to look at the place, you know, that, you know, might save you wasting some trips, but it won't necessarily get you a place more effectively. I wish I could tell you go there with friends, but that didn't seem to work either. I wish I could tell you that it had to do with me having a guide dog, so leave your guide dog at home. But no, this was before I had a guide dog. All I can say is that the difficulties I faced is what motivated me to take the actions I'm currently taking. And, you know, I hope you don't experience, you know, discrimination, but if you do, fill out a letter. You help us out. You know, hopefully you will find people who are decent and don't see your blindness as a reason not to rent you a place.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I think we're down to the final question here from Maggie. I will unmute you now, Maggie. Go ahead and keep it relatively brief, because we're gonna give it a couple more door prizes after this, I think, and then take a little break and then go for the banquet. You are still muted, Maggie.
Okay, there we go.
There you go.
Hear me now? There we go. I forgot to turn my mic on. Sorry, guys. Okay, so I've got a couple points here. I've got 3. And I'll keep
Try
it
and
there.
keep it relatively brief, because we're getting pretty tight.
Yeah. So Justin, I guess the only thing, because I've been through the whole homelessness journey. I was homeless for 2 years because of discrimination. No lie.
Yeah.
So if it hadn't been for my parents, like me and my husband and my cats would have been on the street, man. No lie at all. So, you know, but the thing is, if you get a place and the person is feeling like they're really free to, like, they want to rent to you, lock it up that second, like, right in writing, lock it up. Don't go away without a written signature of a person that they want to rent you the place. Because what happened to me, my very first time I went to get an apartment, and I was like, this was back in 2001, so I was like 21 years old. And the very first time that I went to get an apartment, and I didn't know all this stuff. And the thing was, they had a lot of rules because it was right beside a Christian school, a Christian college. So they said, you have to be a woman because it's all girls renting the apartment. I was like, no problem. You have to be Christian. Totally understandable. All the students are Christians. They don't need, whatever. It is what it is. So totally understandable. I'm that. And there was a couple other things I had to be like, I had to understand couldn't have guys in the apartment and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, total. I get it. I'm completely fine with that. And they even asked me, because they said there's no sidewalk from where the apartment is. There's no sidewalk between that and the main area. It's all going to be highway for about a mile. And I said, that's not a problem for me because I have a driver. I had somebody that I paid to come pick me up and take me anywhere I wanted to go. And I also had friends that could help me. So that was completely fine. But I didn't lock it up. The guy was completely willing to rent to me, and I did not lock it up because I trusted him. And I got a call 9:30 p.m. on the 23rd of December. Or 22nd of December. I was about to go home for Christmas. 9:30 p.m. The people had 2 days to call me at a reasonable time so I could look for something else. And 9:30 p.m. on the 23rd of December, I get a call from this old lady basically saying, oh, we thought about it. And we basically don't want to rent you the place because you're blind. And it was just really devastating. And so what I would say to you, man, is lock it down. If the guy wants to rent to you, or whoever's with you wants to rent to you and everything's fine, lock it down before they have a chance to talk to anybody else. And that way you can say, nope, your name is on a paper, it's inked in. I don't know how sound that is, Ben, but that's what I would say.
Really good advice. I sorry, I forget the name of the person who's turning.
Maggie.
No, not Maggie. The person just before you that was asking for the advice. Justin. So I'd say to Justin, that's good advice. So my second year, I'll keep this really quick, but I met with the landlord. I had gone to the place. The landlord wasn't there. He was a bit of an absentee landlord, but the roommates let me look at the place. I'd seen the place. I met separately with the landlord. We met at a Tim Hortons. I gave him the money and I got a receipt right then and there. Okay. And
good job.
Within 2-3 hours, he called me back wanting me to give his money back. And I said, no.
H to the no, man.
and he said, oh, you really got me over a barrel here. I'm like, I've got you over a barrel. I gave you first and last month's rent. How am I different than the other tenant? And the funny thing is, I mentioned discrimination to this individual, and he became very defensive. And I had to point out to him, no, if you say no and everyone says no, who do I have left?
And you're over a rather than a barrel.
and the funny thing is, by the end of my 2 months there, he thought I was a great tenant. He totally changed his opinion. Yeah,
that's awesome.
He might actually be a witness for me in this court case.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. And then the second thing that I wanted to ask, and we were talking about undue hardship. Okay, let's say somebody's in a wheelchair. Okay, I'm just being perverse. I really want to know the answer to this. Let's say somebody's in a wheelchair and they need a ramp, and this place is perfect for them, but they don't have a ramp on it. And their church or their family or an organization or whatever decides that they want to pay for a ramp to go onto this landlord's house. It could happen.
Yeah, and that would have to factor into the tribunal's decision. So yes, if you were in a wheelchair and that situation was happening and someone didn't want to rent, but a church organization would pay for the wheelchair ramp, then you could certainly argue that it's not undue hardship. The church will pay for it, and if they say, oh, well, it would ruin the aesthetics and the property value and the other things people like to say because they honestly just want to be whatever. Then, the tribunal will look at that. I mean, you've got to struggle, but certainly that would help to support the case that it's not undue hardship.
Okay. And the third thing I want to ask is...
I'm sorry, I have to interject, but we're going to have to cut things off now because we are running very late here. So